Creative Arts Therapy. Each week, we'll explore new ways that music, art, and dance can reach, connect with, and help individuals of all stages of health and wellness. Hi, I'm Bree Bynan, a board-certified music therapist and the managing partner for the Palm Beach Music Therapy Institute. Tune in as I interview professionals from healthcare and educational backgrounds on the impact of the creative arts. If you prefer to watch our live video stream, simply visit www.pbmti.com. Hello, thank you so much for joining us tonight. You're listening to and watching Palm Beach Music Therapy Connections. I'm your host, Bree Bynan, board-certified music therapist and neurologic music therapist here locally in South Florida with the Palm Beach Music Therapy Institute. If this is your first time joining us today, listening either on the radio or watching our live video stream, we're so glad you're here. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to join us. If you're driving, hope you have a safe commute wherever you're going. Especially if you're driving, I'm hoping that today will bring you a little bit of a relaxation on an otherwise possibly stressful commute. We're going to continue with kind of this theme that we've created over the last several weeks. It kind of came out of nowhere. I really didn't plan it, and sometimes some of the best themes end up that way. Continuing this idea of mindfulness, of checking in with ourselves, and specifically today, self-care, which for many of us is a topic that we probably avoid. I know it's definitely something I personally avoid without saying that I avoid it, while telling others to practice self-care on a regular basis. I'm sure many of us do, especially if we are in the healthcare field and we are caregivers, either professional or personal caregivers. We're constantly telling people to take care of themselves while we're constantly taking care of others, and sometimes forget to shine that light back on ourselves. So we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of self-care, of self-love today, and we're going to talk to music therapists about it. And we could talk to specialists from all different fields who are passionate about self-care, certainly. And if you are someone who is passionate about self-care or someone who's coming into it, the idea of this for yourself, please do call into the show over the next hour. I'd love to hear about from you at home about how you introduce self-care and self-love into your everyday life. The number is 888-565-1470. Feel free to call in and share those. I'm sure if it's helping you, it's going to help someone else. But we are going to be talking specifically to music therapists today. Our first caller is calling in. She is a music therapist at All Children's Hospitals, Johns Hopkins in St. Petersburg. And she has a passion for self-care. We're going to find out what that means to her professionally and personally. But here's why I think, just my opinion, there's no research that I know of done on this topic, just my opinion, why if you're going to learn about self-care, a music therapist is an excellent person to learn from. And here's why I say that. First of all, we're musicians. And if you are a musician, or you know and love a musician, you know that we are not ones to take time out of our schedule. We don't have time to take in our schedule to practice self-care. We are often, again, just my opinion, not to include everyone in, but in my experience, perfectionists. And I'm actually right in the heart of reading a book for myself right now, The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown. And that title is very scary to me because I've pretty much defined myself as that as a musician my whole life, since I started lessons at 5 years old. We literally, as musicians, spend our entire lives working towards a goal of applause. Just take a moment to think about that. That is literally the end goal of what we're working towards, is we're putting in countless hours practicing, having recitals, doing lessons, practicing on our own. If you've gone to college for music, you know how intense this even gets, being in the practice room till 2, 3 in the morning for applause, looking for that feeling of worthiness from someone else. It's the heart of what we do. And then, as music therapists, we take all of that background, the first 20 plus years of our lives of working towards that applause, and now we are in a helper profession. So we're uncomfortable with the applause because really the focus is not supposed to be on us. It's supposed to be on our patients. So now we've completely gone the opposite extreme, and we are still finding our worth by making someone else feel better, by bringing them comfort, connection, by reaching them. And somehow in between, we forget to take that time for ourselves, for our self-care. I remember when I first moved down to Florida for an internship, now about almost 8 years ago, and I heard the term self-care in my orientation for my job, for my new internship. And I remember my supervisor at the time, the supervisor of the department, who's been on the show before, Chelsea Johnson, hi Chelsea, gave this presentation for the all-staff orientation on self-care. And she had everyone in the room contribute to this list of what are some things that we can do to take care of ourselves. Now, this was for a hospice internship. Obviously, the work we were going to be doing was going to require us giving a lot of ourselves and being in some very intense and vulnerable situations. So it was really important for us to have these skills, these self-care skills. I was made so uncomfortable by this idea of looking inward. I remember I thought, I've moved down here for this job. I'm ready to pour myself into it. The last thing I want to do is stop and put the light back on myself, So I just kept raising my hand because that's what I do. I would say, we get another job so that we can take our mind off this job and work weekends. Okay, I still remember her face. I remember your face, Chelsea, as she begrudgingly wrote that down. We find other ways that we can perform and use music so we can use music for our self-care. Okay, getting closer, but still not there. I remember that. I remember feeling, wow, maybe I'm not getting it. Maybe I'm not understanding exactly what she means by this idea of self-care and self-love. Now, that was 8 years ago. I'm still working through it. It's a journey. It's a process. And so hopefully going to shed a little light on that today. Again, returning to my idea of if you're going to learn about self-care, if you're going to learn from, or at least start exploring the idea from someone, again, a music therapist is a great place to start. If a music therapist tells you they've got a handle on this and they are showing themselves love and showing themselves care, you want to listen to them because that's really a big process to work through. Also, a lot of us in this field, overwhelming majority, are women. And women, our societal role is to give to others, and it's to be kind of perfect and to be meek and to be modest. And those are not always things that lend themselves well to caring for ourselves, to standing up for ourselves, to putting our foot down once in a while and doing something just for ourselves. So this is a blog that I found online called healthyplace.com. And just gives some ideas. Now, these might be very, very simple ideas, but I like how it's broken up between inner self-care and outer self-care. So I'm just going to read a couple examples. You can go on the blog, healthyplace.com, and find this for yourself. But here's some ideas from the inner self-care section. It says, make a date with yourself. Spend an hour alone doing something that nourishes you, not work or things on your to-do list. Read, which is one way that I've found solace in this lately. Explore a hobby, walk around your neighborhood, visit a museum, etc. Praise yourself when you do something awesome. Just take a minute and recognize, I did really great, whatever that was. Give yourself that praise. Paint or write something that lets out your creative energy. For music therapists, art therapists, anyone in the creative field, sometimes that is good to do that for ourselves, and sometimes we need to unplug from those things. So check in with yourself. This is not one size fits all. Unplug. That's a big one. Another thing I want to point out about this is, again, it does not it's not a one size fits all. What might be self-care for you one day may not be the next day. Sometimes allowing myself to be in my pajamas and hang out for maybe longer than I care to admit on a weekend and scrolling through Facebook might be the self-care I need. This week, getting Facebook off my phone was self-care because it was too much of a distraction. So every day is going to look differently. Outer self-care, eat something you enjoy. That's a big one for me. That's been Ben & Jerry's for me lately. Take a long bath or shower. Sit around your bathrobe. Read magazines. Here's a personal favorite for me. Touch a pet. Spend time with a pet. If you don't have a pet, go to a shelter. There are so many pets there that want to be touched and loved. There's just something very therapeutic about being around an animal and experiencing that love for them, especially if you are able to give your time to an animal who's in a shelter. They can't get touched enough, and it just makes us feel good. Before we get into talking to our first guest today, I do want to bring it back to a few weeks ago when we started this theme, this idea that started with mindfulness. And John Britton, who was a graduating Master's Music Therapy student, was talking at length about this project he was working on, specifically working with music therapy and this idea of mindfulness. And he said something that just really opened up my mind to this idea, and I was skeptical. I thought, well, my mind's always going, right? As many musicians are. We stay as many creative people are. Our minds are always going. We're always taking in all the stimulus around us. So I was afraid I wasn't going to be successful. Okay, there's that idea of perfectionism again. At this mindfulness, at slowing down, at meditation. He explained how music is so naturally a way that sets us up for this mindfulness, because for those 3 minutes, we are forced to attend and appreciate each note as it comes. You can't fast forward through a live performance. You can't flip to the end of the book of a live performance. You are forced to be in that moment. So I love that idea. I don't know if I'll do it every week, but at least while we're on this theme of self-care, I do want to continue this idea of taking this moment to appreciate live music, to be mindful about it. So this is something that John sent me to kind of help set up the experience. Before we cut to a commercial, I'm going to share this song together. It says, listen to the sound of the music itself with an open and accepting attitude. If you find you get distracted by a thought, a noise, or a sensation, simply recognize the distraction, then gently bring your attention back to the music. So I want you to focus on that as you listen to the song Imagine. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us. Above us only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. You imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will live as one. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us, and the world will be as one. Stick around. Right after this quick commercial break, we're going to be talking to Kelly about the importance of self-care. Thanks so much.
Mom's fall was a wake-up call. We knew she needed help, but we also knew she'd never leave her home.
With jobs and kids, we can't always be there. We weren't sure who to trust to help around the house and make sure she takes her medications.
We did our research and found our answer, Bright Star Care. Their home care teams are led by registered nurses, with help available 24/7.
Thanks to Bright Star Care, Mom can stay where she wants to be, at home.
For a standard of care that raises the bar, call 844 for Bright Star.
The Palm Beach Music Therapy Institute is a professional music therapy practice serving medical, community, and educational settings throughout Southeast Florida. With our experienced team of 11 board-certified music therapists, we use music and research-based therapeutic interventions to help individuals of all ages and abilities reach their goals and increase their quality of life. For more information on our services and programs, please visit our website at pbmti.com. Engage with us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or call us at 561-747-9944. You are listening to Palm Beach Music Therapy Connections. If you'd like to join the conversation, the toll-free number is 888-565-1470. Now back to the show. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. You're listening to and watching Palm Beach Music Therapy Connections. I'm your host, Bree Bynan, and today we are talking about self-care and self-love and the importance of that professionally and personally. And as I mentioned in my beginning monologue today, I cannot think of too many people better suited to talk about this as music therapists. We know a thing or two about the importance of self-care. So I'm so excited to introduce to you all Kelly Morris, board-certified music therapist in St. Petersburg with Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. Kelly, are you there?
I'm here.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you so much for calling in and joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So how this kind of started is, I just kind of set a word out to some music therapists of who feels passionately on this topic. And I really figured that this was a good way to find someone, because if you aren't comfortable with the idea, you're not going to want to talk about it, right? So you really have to feel that passion like you shared with me for it. And that's why I was really excited that you were able to come on and talk to us about it, because I think it's such an important topic that sometimes we don't even know we need, really.
So true.
Yes. So why the passion for self-care? What do you see its importance being in our field, but also in our everyday lives?
Well, I think that my passion for it really stemmed out of not doing it for a little while and then realizing how important it is and how much better things are when you're actually acknowledging how important self-care is, especially in a field like music therapy where you're around a lot of really high anxiety or high stress situations all the time. And so after not doing it, especially in college, you hear a lot about self-care is so important, but actually implementing it has really shown me such a difference in how life can be when I'm actually taking care of myself.
Do you mind sharing a little bit about what those differences are that you notice?
Sure. Yeah. I think a common misconception, or maybe just something that people don't always acknowledge, is that self-care is short-term and immediate sometimes, but it's also long-term and it requires discipline. So there are things that I do that are in the moment responding to a stressful situation where I really do need to take some time to process things immediately, but a lot of what I've found is long-term when you're actually implementing, for example, I really like exercise. It's a good way to process things. And so when you're looking at the long-term effects of getting in that routine, because it's hard to get in, it's just an overall wellness that kind of it starts to creep in that you didn't really expect. And it's easier to refresh when you're in the habit of doing self-care things and acknowledging how important that is.
Absolutely. And it's a practice, like you said. I think that's something that becomes overwhelming. And again, ironically, because, boy, there's nothing that musicians understand more than practice and the importance of that and honing in on a craft. But we also really like that immediate gratification of things. So when we hear these big abstract concepts, or they seem abstract, of self-care and self-love, again, not speaking for everyone, but it can be overwhelming. Of do I have the time to dedicate to this? And it's kind of like what you're saying, Kelly, is we can't afford not to.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny. I was actually I was doing some research about self-care, and the first time that I looked on our databases that we have access to, there wasn't really much listed in practical things that you can do for self-care. It was, how to medically care for yourself or things like that. But it's actually, and the research is there, but it's not always easy to find. So when you're talking about practicality, if you think that self-care is some huge time commitment or huge mind-blowing whatever, you're not going to be able to really grasp that it can be something as simple as getting in a habit of taking time to breathe or being present or going for a run. It's actually simpler than we think, but it does require practice. And what a great point you have that musicians are pretty familiar with practice, but really like the instant gratification of if I play this chord, then this sound comes out, and that's how it's done.
And you know what, that it's so funny because a lot of this that I was sharing about earlier, and I don't know if you got a chance to listen in or not, but it kind of just coming to me as I'm driving here today, this idea of applause, right? And I know that it's not just musicians that are listening today, but odds are you know a musician. And who's applauding for us when we're taking care of ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Ourselves.
Right. We need to be. Exactly. And that is a shift. That's a big shift in thinking for us. So it's really interesting. So just to back up a little bit, Kelly, because I know you said that the idea kind of gets introduced in college. I don't really know if maybe I wasn't receptive to it. Maybe it was in my classes, and again, I just kind of pushed it away so much I don't really remember. But it really is something that should start, in our education. It's really something that should start when we're young, and we are kind of starting these habits that we keep with us the rest of our lives. But from what you're sharing and my experiences, it wasn't really until our first careers that it was really let us know this is something that you need to adapt before too long. So going back a little bit, tell us a little bit about the setting that you are working in currently.
The setting I'm in currently is a pediatric hospital. So there's a lot of stress here. When you're working with kids that are sick, there's a lot going on, and it's a different dynamic than college, because in college it's coursework and things that deadlines and things like that, and in a hospital you're dealing a lot more with emotional consequences and situations that are really intense. And people that work in hospitals, and especially pediatric hospitals, see a lot of things that typical people don't really encounter, or maybe they see on the news. And so it's a pretty intense situation. And I think as I've been working here, the longer I've worked here, the longer I've realized the importance of self-care. And I, honestly, the difference between, absolutely, it should start as kids. But sometimes things change. I think that over the years, I've really just kind of varied in what's been most helpful. So in college, if I practiced self-care things, which was not often, a lot of times it had to do with writing, like writing in a journal or sometimes writing songs, which I still use that one today, but I don't do as much journaling. But one of the articles I did find on the American Psychological Association was talking about grad school. And their example, well, there was a quote from it that just says, it acknowledges that we, whether purposely or inadvertently, we neglect ourselves. And part of what is important in that is self-awareness and knowing our boundaries and knowing when it's okay to let that slip in one direction or another, and knowing when we really do need to step back because it's going to impact us deeper than we realized, and it's going to impact our competence. So I feel like it varies depending on the situation you're in, depending on what skills you're using. I know I use a lot of different ones because not every situation I encounter is the same.
Sure. It's just so amazing in words like boundaries and being aware of our own boundaries. I'm certainly a novice in this world, a novice that's exuberant and excited to learn more, which is why it's naturally been kind of really cool to focus the show on this over the last couple weeks, and to kind of share this journey that I'm going through with others as well, and find out that we're not alone. We're all kind of looking for this opportunity to learn more about self-care and mindfulness, and because it is so important. It's not just buzzwords that we hear, especially in the medical community. The idea of meditation, mindfulness is popping up a lot. But I love that different things along the lines of wellness are becoming a little bit more mainstream, coming back around, which is really cool. And so I'm, pouring myself into a lot of reading, and I mentioned the Brene Brown earlier, and to talk about the importance of boundaries. Particularly for those of us in the helper field or helper professions, but so many people in work and at home, sometimes they have dual roles, are caregivers. Mm-hmm. They're working full-time jobs, and they're coming home and they're caring for their parents, their spouse, their children, their whoever it is. And this idea of self-care, of self-love, of setting boundaries, it's not only is it foreign, it's like, no, that I can't do that. That's selfish.
Mm-hmm.
If you encounter that, what is your response to that?
Well, I'm going to draw a music analogy because it just makes sense to me. So on a guitar, you have 6 strings, usually 4 to 6 strings. And when one of them is out of tune, when one of them's pulled too tight, when it's too tense, any chord that you play is not going to sound good, because that one's off. It's not getting the care it needs. It's not getting tuned the way that it needs to be ringing the way it was intended, and the whole thing's going to sound bad. And so I do not yet have children, but I sympathize with the families that have so many things on their plates. They have soccer tournaments, and they have work full time, and they have an infant, and there's so many plates that they've got spinning in the air that it's really hard for self-care. But I think one of the other things we sometimes forget, or maybe don't even know, is that some self-care takes 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. I love to teach people how to do a mindfulness exercise. I love to teach people, hey, give me 30 to 60 seconds of your time. We're just going to do a breathing exercise. Or a counselor that I once talked with in college was telling me about mindfulness when doing the dishes, and really paying attention to the textures and the sounds and the way things look. And when you wash soap off of your hands, it's a really amazing concept if you just slow down. And so I think it's hard to remember that slowing down actually can be part of your self-care if you don't have a ton of time.
Beautiful. I love those points. We did have another music therapist who was going to call in, but she had something come up, and she exercised self-care by attending to that and not stressing herself out to meet this moment as well. So, Kelly, are you able to stay on the line for a little while longer with me?
And I'm so proud of her.
Right? Kudos to her. Absolutely. So we're going to cut to a quick commercial break, and then we're going to come back and continue talking to you, Kelly. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Moms fall was a wake-up call. We knew she needed help, but we also knew she'd never leave her home.
With jobs and kids, we can't always be there. We weren't sure who to trust to help around the house and make sure she takes her medications.
We did our research and found our answer, Bright Star Care. Their home care teams are led by registered nurses, with help available 24/7.
Thanks to Bright Star Care, Mom can stay where she wants to be, at home.
For a standard of care that raises the bar, call 844 for Bright Star.
The Palm Beach Music Therapy Institute is a professional music therapy practice serving medical, community, and educational settings throughout Southeast Florida. With our experienced team of 11 board-certified music therapists, we use music and research-based therapeutic interventions to help individuals of all ages and abilities reach their goals and increase their quality of life. For more information on our services and programs, please visit our website at pbmti.com. Engage with us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or call us at 561-747-9944. You are listening to Palm Beach Music Therapy Connections. If you'd like to join the conversation, the toll-free number is 888-565-1470. Now back to the show. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. You're listening to Palm Beach Music Therapy Connections. I'm your host, Bree Bynum, board-certified music therapist, and we're talking to Kelly Morris, another board-certified music therapist and a NICU music therapist at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital in St. Petersburg, Florida. Again, Kelly, thanks so much for calling in tonight.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful. So before the break, kind of introducing you, your work, and what kind of led you to this place of really honing in on the importance of self-care. Now, I want to talk about this in a couple chunks. One, how we can use music in our profession to help others with self-care, and then returning to that, how we as the professional can use it in our own lives. So let's kind of start in the work setting. Is this something that you're able to implement in your work, is teaching others about self-care through music therapy?
Yes, and sometimes it uses music and sometimes it doesn't. There are, progressive muscle relaxation and using instrumental music to help relax or take a moment, or songwriting with a family that allows them some time to just be a family. Those are great ways that I use music in my sessions to kind of encourage and set an example for what it looks like to take some time for yourself amidst the busyness, amidst the schedules that we have that get a little crazy. And I think there are two sides of it when it comes to professionally helping families. Sometimes it's that they have too much time here, and sometimes it's that they don't have enough because their doctor is coming in and out, and they've got family visiting and all sorts of things. So I think it depends on the situation, whether it's in work or not. I think the situation that you're in really does impact the things that you're able to do, but it doesn't mean that you have to cut out self-care entirely.
I think that's great. And one thing, just to follow up on that, what are some tools that they learn in that moment that they're able to take home from there? Take them either that night or months later when maybe they've left the hospital. And how can they keep that as part of their life?
Well, one of the things I love, you said this a little earlier, and I love that you said this. You said, we're not alone. And I think sometimes people need to know I'm not the only one neglecting self-care. And it's not a bad thing that I'm neglecting it, because now I'm aware that I'm neglecting it and I can fix that. So I think the real basic take-home, what I try to instill and encourage, is that you're not the only one who's not doing this, but can we aim at starting a new practice, even if it's simple. So some of the things that I mention frequently or work on are things like mindfulness, which is purposely engaging in an activity, even something as simple as sitting in a chair. There are a lot of things that we're forgetting about when we do that because we do it often, or maybe we don't do it often. I know there are a lot of nurses that don't really sit in chairs very often. But typical practices that we have that are really basic, and using those because they have to get done. Or listening to a song that's familiar and actually stopping and picking out some of the parts that you like and figuring out what it is about those that make them special. So a lot of times I'll take practical things that show up in your world and use them in a different light and propose that as a way to really stop and give themselves some refresh time, or using a certain song that's always used for relaxation. So whenever that song comes on, it triggers a memory of, oh, wait, you know, I haven't visited self-care in a while. I haven't visited that relaxation thing that we went over with the music therapist when we were in the hospital. I bet I've got that lying around somewhere. And they get to practice it when they're at home. I want to give them resources where they can reuse and not depend on me to practice self-care.
Absolutely. And, we can talk about this all day, and oftentimes we do. But, just like we tell our clients, sometimes it takes being a part of it or seeing it to believe it. And I've seen that firsthand. I was sharing earlier when John, the music therapy student from UM, was on, and he explained that concept to me about how, hey, if the idea of going to a mindfulness class is overwhelming, it's out of your realm, your comfort zone right now, just think about taking that moment of listening to a song to be mindful. And I can't tell you how many times since that conversation 3 weeks ago, that idea has come to me when I'm just sitting in the car listening to a favorite song. Okay, Bree, just be mindful of it. Just be aware of, live in the moment of this song. Appreciate it for what it is rather than, skipping on to what the next, you've got to be there at what time and what you're doing next. Be in that moment, even if it's just 90 seconds or 2 minutes. It packs a lot of power.
Yeah, and if you can get a tangible, noticeable response, if you can get someone to really feel the importance of that by, practicing for 30 seconds with them, or giving them some sort of trigger where they're going to hear it and maybe remember what you said, or one of the things that I am constantly amazed at how well this works. I don't know if you've ever done progressive muscle relaxation.
No, but I was just going to ask you next if you could explain that a little bit more.
So progressive muscle relaxation is quite possibly one of my favorite things ever.
Wonderful.
And basically what the concept is that we hold a lot of tension in our muscles. I don't know many adults that would disagree with that. But if you intentionally tighten a muscle for a certain amount of time, for example, 3 to 5 seconds, you intentionally tighten, like if you make a fist and squeeze your fist as hard as you can, breathe in and keep it tight, and breathe out and then relax as you're breathing out. That muscle was intentionally tightened so it can now relax. So progressive muscle relaxations are this progression that goes either from toes to head or head to toe, and it goes through a bunch of muscle groups, especially ones that we tend to hold tight, like your shoulders. One of them is raising your shoulders up as high as they go and holding it, even though it's uncomfortable, and then relaxing them. And it completely changes your whole body, because there are usually at least 2 spots in your body that you had no idea you were so tense until you purposely tensed them and then relaxed them. So I do that with music because I'm a music therapist, but you can do that without music. You can do it with just breathing and muscle tensing and releasing.
Does that go along with kind of your point earlier of how music, how to not use music in that self-care professionally?
So when it comes to, I use music a lot when teaching people because it actually structures the experience, so it gives them a certain set time that they start to feel a rhythm. You can do that when you're sitting in a chair at work when there is no music, and you purposely, I can do it sitting right here, tensing your thigh muscles for 5 to 10 seconds. The more you do it, the longer you can hold it. And then once you release, you really do feel that tension just kind of go away. So I prefer it structured to music, but you don't have to have it. And that's one of the things I like telling families. You don't have to play guitar to do this. I just want you to feel it, because when you notice that difference, I had a mom tell me the other day, oh my gosh, I realized that was for my daughter, but I feel so good right now because she was doing it along with us on the couch.
That gives me chills just to even hear. Sometimes the caregiver, they even think, I know this isn't for me, but I felt it. It's for you. This is for you.
Yeah, I tell parents that all the time. In the professional setting, Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital, we do a lot of family-centered care. So I've even offered, if it's a teenage patient that doesn't really want their parents in the room, because one of them is making a funny face, so I'll offer to let them do it by themselves, but then I'll connect with the parent and just say, hey, if you want to do this too, it's for you. Let's go find a room. Let's go to the music therapy room. Wherever we need to go, let's go do this because it's for you too.
I love that. That's awesome. The second part of that we were chatting about a little earlier, the other music therapist who's going to come on said that one of the things she wanted to share is outside of her work as a board-certified music therapist, she's also a performer around town. So that's kind of her nights and weekends gigs. And a lot of us do that. Sometimes we disguise it and call it self-care because we're doing music outside of work, but really we're just doing another job. So that adds another opportunity for us to kind of look at ourselves and, okay, so how do we use music therapeutically for ourselves? How don't we? And when do we leave the music out of it? So what are your thoughts on that?
I am not at all a performer. It actually makes me really nervous. If I have a therapeutic goal in mind, I will rap, I will sing, I will do whatever you need me to as a therapist. But when it comes to performing, that's actually more stress for me. So it's pretty easy for me to just say, well, that's not what I do for self-care. But I think you have a really valid point. When does it become just another job? And honestly, just even in the last few months, I've been really noticing the importance of not having music, which at first sounded really bad to me because I'm a music therapist. I should love music. But there are some times where I need a whole day without really listening to music because I do music all the time. I work at the hospital 4 days a week. I do stuff at my church with music. I do a lot of music. And so there's some days where I just don't want music. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that that's a way to just separate, this is my relax day, and the rest of the days I'm going to sing Frozen 100 times or whatever else I'm singing in work. So I think that that's a valid thing to discuss. Is, first of all, when it comes to your other music therapist friend, maybe that is really enjoyable for her. Maybe she gains something from that. But I also think on the other side of the spectrum, you don't have to recoup and do your self-care using music all the time.
And it's going to be different for everyone, too. And that's okay. I genuinely think there were times in my career that it was very helpful for me to have a performance job at a church or something like that, to be doing something so different. And then I just, I did reach a point where I needed time not being involved in music directly 7 days a week. And allowing myself that, now that we're talking about that, is self-care. Allowing myself to set that boundary. And I think that's difficult for us to recognize as well.
Absolutely. No one tells you that.
Right.
Amidst all of the talk, all or none of the talk of self-care, there's some people that it doesn't get talked about much or maybe ever. And there are other people, they bring up self-care all the time. And I think that it's not always mentioned that sometimes self-care is avoiding something, not doing something.
Saying no. Even just saying that now made me a little uncomfortable. We are in a society where it is good to be open and saying yes to everything, and there's certainly a lot of merit to that, and certainly a lot of opportunities come to myself and to others by having that open attitude. But a lot of amazing things can happen too when we say no. Wow, we're getting deep now. All right, Kelly, hang around with me just for a little bit longer. We're going to cut to one more commercial, and then I want to talk through maybe some of the scripts, some of the things that you're doing with clients in your hospital, give our audience some tools at home. So stick around for this quick commercial break. We'll be right back.
All right.
Mom's fall was a wake-up call. We knew she needed help, but we also knew she'd never leave her home.
With jobs and kids, we can't always be there. We weren't sure who to trust to help around the house and make sure she takes her medications.
We did our research and found our answer, Bright Star Care. Their home care teams are led by registered nurses, with help available 24/7.
Thanks to Bright Star Care, Mom can stay where she wants to be, at home.
For a standard of care that raises the bar, call 844 for Bright Star.
The Palm Beach Music Therapy Institute is a professional music therapy practice serving medical, community, and educational settings throughout Southeast Florida. With our experienced team of 11 board-certified music therapists, we use music and research-based therapeutic interventions to help individuals of all ages and abilities reach their goals and increase their quality of life. For more information on our services and programs, please visit our website at pbmti.com. Engage with us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or call us at 561-747-9944. You are listening to Palm Beach Music Therapy Connections. If you'd like to join the conversation, the toll-free number is 888-565-1470. Now back to the show. Hello, thank you so much for joining us tonight. You're listening to and watching Palm Beach Music Therapy Connections. I'm your host, Bree Bynan. I am talking to Kelly Morris, board-certified music therapist and NICU music therapist in St. Petersburg, Florida at Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital. Still there, Kelly?
I'm here.
Thanks so much for sticking around. Before we close up today with just some kind of examples of some of the work you do for types of self-care, coping strategies that you give your clients and their families at the hospital, I just wanted a quick mention on my way here today. I posted a picture of myself. I said, we're talking about self-care today. Getting all dressed up in one of my favorite dresses was how I was going to celebrate self-care this evening, and I asked did a little audience polling, what are you doing for self-care? And I got some pretty creative answers here. I got a picture of a motorcycle, a request to get a pedicure with me, which I'm definitely down for, Shoshana. I'm committing to that. Someone says taking an Epsom salt bath with candles and listening to awesome music. I even got a hashtag of ice cream for dinner. Nice, very good. And digging in the garden. So it looks like something different for everyone, and that's wonderful. So listen to yourself of what is self-care for you. Again, it can be as simple as 30 seconds of mindfully sitting in your office chair, like Kelly said, or honestly, one of my personal favorites, hashtag ice cream for dinner. I can't argue with that. That sounds amazing. So, Kelly, I just wanted to close up with just some ideas of some of the ways you implement this idea of self-care and these coping strategies in your work. And also want to give you an opportunity to talk about the hospital you work at and some of the services you all provide there.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate to be working for a hospital that does really acknowledge the stress that our careers inflict on us. Each department that works here has a different role in that. And I think it was so great to hear in orientation that there isn't really a department that's more important than the others. So as music therapy, or I'm a part of the child life department, so as child life specialists, they have more of an emotional connection and an emotional psychosocial role, but that's not any more important than the nurses who have a medical but also sort of an emotional role, and the physicians have a different role, and our environmental services, they really do build relationship with these families, and I think it's so important to acknowledge that in any hospital, but I'm so grateful that at Johns Hopkins All Children's we really do get to focus on that and acknowledge that self-care is important, because we see a lot of things and we could easily get burned out if we don't take time to ride our motorcycle or do ice cream for dinner, which sounds amazing.
Right.
Like, it's really important to have a facility that acknowledges that, and I realize that not everyone is in that type of setting. And so I think it's really, it's a great discussion to be having no matter where you're at, because we're all still human, so we all need ways to cope with whatever stress our work throws at us. My husband works for a college, and the stress that he encounters every day is very different than mine, but it's still stressful. And I think that's really important to acknowledge, that one type of stress is not worse than another type of stress. It all gets to us if we don't do something with it.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And just having that appreciation for where you work and feeling appreciated at work is caring for ourselves in itself. I mean, it's a necessary that we go to work every day. And, I think a lot of people, I worked in hospice care for many years. So we had this conversation a lot of what would you change? If you could have changed anything. And it's really hard to hear when people don't appreciate or didn't feel appreciated or wish they had chose another path, chose another line of work or whatever that meant, or taken off time from work more, spent more time with family. We don't have to get to 95 in this stage looking back to have that insight. And that was a huge thing for me. Starting out my career in that setting and kind of hearing some of those regrets, after all these years, it's incredible. And also, like you said, everyone's stress is different. I think that people might be surprised maybe to find out that we are dealing with all these stressors in our field, because when we walk into a room, how many times have you heard this, Kelly? You have the best job. I mean, I just wish I could have your job.
I hear that almost daily.
And and I don't disagree that we have the best job, but we are such performers at heart, right? We're never going to not walk into a room and be that right person for that moment, because that's kind of our core. People may not see the documentation or the fact that we maybe just lost someone who was really special to us, personal or a patient, or got caught in the middle of an altercation. These are all things that we're dealing with every day sometimes, depending on what setting you're in. And yet we can't bring that into the next room. So that has to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And there's only so long that you can tuck that deep down and put a smile on and move on.
Yeah. Somebody once used the analogy of having a beach ball underwater, where you can push that thing under the water, but at some point in some place it's going to escape you and it's going to pop out through the water, and you can't really control that. So I think that's such a, I love what you said about having whether or not, acknowledging the personal issues that happen in our life, because that's not something we can bring into a session. No. I'm here to support families. Mm-hmm. I work for this hospital as a music therapist to support families in highly stressful situations, and it is not at all acceptable for me to bring my stress into their room. And that's something, the only way I'm not going to carry that around is if I'm dealing with it outside of there. If I'm dealing with it in the moments that it comes up when I'm in my office or when I go for a walk or something like that, it's going to come up, but you can control when that comes up a lot of times. And there are some situations that we need to be really sensitive to, like losing a loved one. That's going to resurface. But if you're practicing self-care, that's really helpful for you. And I think it's important to acknowledge when there's self-care that's actually tuning things out versus self-care that's allowing you to focus and process. So when I go for a run, it's with the intention of, let me think through these things. I do have a lot of spiritual beliefs, so sometimes people pray while they're walking or running. And so there are things like that where it's not just, I'm going to go boxing because it gets out energy. Mm-hmm. It's actually being intentional and saying, I need to spend time thinking about this, or I'm not going to be able to stop thinking about it.
Perfect point. Again, thank you so much, Kelly, for taking the time to come on. I just want to close with one more thought that I just kind of came to me that kind of wraps up what we're talking about. I went to a friend of mine, her pinning ceremony. She graduated nursing program, and it was 100 or so nurses on the stage, newly graduating nurses, and one of the students stood up and said, if you see someone with a purple pin on, it means they lost a loved one during this program, and kept going. And that was an overwhelming amount of people on that stage. And I thought, if we all just had a pin, that showed that we were going through something, I think we would all be very surprised to see who's dealing with something every day, that we encounter. And it just really made me mindful of that. To close with that, Happy Nurses Week to all our nurses listening. I hope that there are nurses listening and that you do find value in this, to take a moment for yourself and practice self-care, because you deserve it. We all do. Thank you, Kelly, again, for giving us these wonderful tools. It was such a pleasure to talk with you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. We're going to be posting some more resources, so follow us on social media. We'll see you next week. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Reese.
Listening to Palm Beach Music Therapy Connections. We hope you enjoyed today's program and discovered new ways to bring music, art, and dance into your home or workplace. Please find a copy of today's show at pbmti.com. If you have any questions for our guest or myself, please email me at Bree, that's BREE, at pbmti.com, or call the Palm Beach Music Therapy Institute at 561-747-9944. Tune back in next week for an all-new live show. See you then.
The opinions expressed